Good morning, all. Nice to see everybody. Yeah, Martin's going to get up in a minute. Originally, it was going to be myself, Martin, and Joel, but Martin realised he had so much on his heart to share, which is really good because I know he will be good on this topic. So I've been doing a few questions over the last months. We finished a series after doing it for 7 years. Been taking questions, and Martin asked himself, what about God and the environment? So I thought, well, you'd be better talking about that, you and Joel. But here he is. But I just thought I would give an introduction. We believe from the Word that the earth was created and it was perfect. Adam and Eve were designed to live for eternity, but they sinned, they fell short of the glory of God, and immediately death came. Things began to die. They were also asked to bless you. They were asked to look after the earth, and we're still to do that today, and if we come to anything, we should look after what the earth that God has given us, look after our animals, and Martin might give you better ideas about that. But ultimately, it is Jesus who restores the earth again. The earth is without life because humankind rejected him and there's sin in the world. And we await for Jesus' return. So I'm just going to read from Romans 8. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly awaiting the adoption and the redemption of our body. For we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. So what it's saying here is that creation, our bodies will be redeemed. And when Jesus returns, we will be restored somewhat to what we will be like. If you read prophecies from the Old Testament, it says, if you don't live to 100 years, you'll be considered a sinner. Who would like to live past 100 years? Some of us are getting close, trying not to make eye contact. But we will live longer. It says that the child will put his hand in the viper's den and not be hurt. The bear and the cow will roam together. I milked some cows this morning, and I can't imagine bears coming in as well. But that's what the earth will be restored when Jesus returns. We live in a fallen world, and I do believe that we should look after it. But ultimately, Jesus will restore it, and it's his Spirit that restores creation. So I'm going to invite Martin up now, and he can speak more of the details and his thoughts on it, and you can answer your own question.
Thanks, Graham. Morning, everyone. What? Well, God. Okay. This is definitely a sort of a matter of being careful what you wish for. So, when Graham had that series of Ask Pastor Graham, I thought, I'll give Graham this question, see what he thinks. Snigger, snigger, snigger. And then, of course, he pointed it back to me and said, well, you can answer this question, Martin. So, anyway, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. So, just for full disclosure, I work for the RSPB, and I've worked in conservation for 25 years. So that question has kind of been rooted in my experience of that kind of work. And I asked this question because I've been a Christian for 30 years now, and it's rarely preached from the pulpit. Have we got the presentation? And the question that I asked was actually, how should Christians live out Genesis 1, 26 to 28? Now, we'll come on to, hopefully you're all memorized the Bible, you know exactly what those verses mean anyway. But it's essentially the command from God to rule the creation that he's made. How should we live that out? Because what I feel is over time, Christians have kind of neglected that obligation. They've neglected that command. And our neglect of that command has left the secular world stepping into that space and claiming that territory for themselves. This has led Christians to avoid going into that space because they go towards it and then they see all these non-Christians talking about it. So the space which they should occupy is being occupied by somebody else. So next slide, please. Particularly people like David Attenborough. So here he is, David Attenborough. We're all familiar with him. This is what he says. The fact is, no species has ever had such wholesale control over everything on the earth, living or dead, as we have now. That lays upon us, whether we like it or not, an awesome responsibility. In our hands now lies not only our future, but the future of all living creatures with whom we share this earth. Now, that is just the kind of thing that Christians should be saying. The fact that David Attenborough is saying it should really be an embarrassment to us, because effectively, he's on our turf. What is he doing there? Okay, so our neglect of that has allowed David Attenborough to come forward. So that's what we've got as a result of that. Not only that, but it has led to Christians being blamed for some of these problems in the earth because we've just been absent from this space. So Genesis 1 has been turned upside down by the world, and we as Christians need to reclaim that responsibility for what God first gave us to do. And what I want to do today is sort of explain how we've got there and share how we might go back to reclaiming that territory. Okay, so next slide. So what I'm going to do today is just cover three things: how we should rule the world, how good went bad, and then how we can do it better. Okay, so let's look at Genesis 1, where we started. Next slide. Okay, so Genesis 1, 26-28. Then God said, "Let's make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heaven, over the livestock, over all the earth, and every living creature that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. And then God blessed them, and God said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living creature that lives on the earth." Okay, so that's straightforward. So that's just, where are we in Genesis? Like, God has been busy. He's made the earth. It's just like brand new. He's like, look at this super duper earth that I've got here. It's just got everything in it. It's all really good. And then what does he do with it? He gives it to us to look after. So imagine that. Your dad gets a shiny, fast car, leather seats, fluffy dice, and then he turns around to you and he says, "Okay, my beautiful son or daughter, I'm going to give this car to you." That's kind of the context that we're in. And then and then at the bottom there he says, the question, what he says is, rule the earth and subdue it. Whew. So if you look at those words, they're a bit sort of awkward words because they sound quite strong and they can easily be misrepresented. So what does that really mean? The Hebrew word for subdue is this word kabash, and it has quite a strong, violent connotation. And if you want to look for it other places in the Bible, it was used when Israel went into the Promised Land. And if you look in Joshua, it says, you can kabash the land, take over the land, dominate the land. So that's a little bit awkward. And I, struggle around, look at some of their interpretations and some of the other versions, and they're all quite strong on this domination, this rule thing. You're like, oh my word, what do we do about that? Next slide. So what I want to do is just show you what's happened to that first instruction from God to subdue and dominate the creation. Okay, so I'm going to give you two different interpretations of what that means, how that's been used over time. Some interpretations of this passage have emphasized human mastery over nature. They've said, right guys, domination, that means we're in charge, we rule, we can do what we like. And they've used that to justify the exploitation of creation. Adam named the animals, that basically made them his. He could do what he wants with them. So where has that come from? Well, these two stony-faced guys, See what I did there? Stony face. They're partly responsible. So, okay, this is on the right, Aristotle, on the left, Plato. They're all kind of the same. So back in the day, these guys suddenly started thinking, and they were like, this world thing, what's all that about there? And as a result of these guys thinking, everybody else thought, wow, guys, you can think. Let's just think exactly the same as them. Anyway, so Aristotle was thinking about the world and how the world works, and he looked at nature, and he went, in nature there's like bigger things and faster things and slower things and uglier things. And so he saw this, what he saw was a natural order. And he thought, I like that. I think there's an order in life. I like that. We like order and we like hierarchy. So they proposed this, what they called the scala natura, or the ladder of nature, where certain things were bigger and better than other things. The higher things were more perfect, and the lower things were a little bit And that manifested out into society. So you had slaves, and you had free people, you had Romans and barbarians, and it all made sense, and it was all pretty neat. They all thought, we love this hierarchy. And then if you fast forward to, next slide, if you fast forward to the Middle Ages, then the church thought, we like the idea of hierarchy, that's great, because then we can be in charge, and we can tell everybody what to do, we can maintain control over society. And they came up with this thing, the great chain of being. And that was a hierarchical structure of all matter of life in the universe. And they said it started with God at the top, then it went angels, animals, humans, plants, and minerals. So the society was quite comfortable with this idea of some things being better and more superior to others. And into that quite easily fit this idea of dominion and rule of nature, meant we were in charge. And what happened to that? On the right-hand side there, it meant that guys with dogs stabbed wild boar. There was this kind of idea that animals were not as good as humans. Okay? And I'm going to... Unfortunately, it's meant that Christianity has often led the way in mistreatment of God's creation. So the reading of Genesis 1 led some people in the church to give them a sense of entitlement and duty to rule over creation with an iron fist. And I'm going to read you from this book here, which is kind of the history of the decline of wildlife in the UK, and it's talking about Britain in the 16th century. Okay, so this is what it was like. Britain, to our eyes, was a shameful, barbaric place. Cockfighting was enjoyed by all classes, and bull, bear, and badger baiting were popular recreation. Magic was widely accepted and frequently replaced reason, and was generally and seriously regarded until the 18th century. Catholic Britain and the post-Reformation Protestant regime which followed were heavily under the doctrines of the church, and religious teaching was firmly embedded at the heart of much of the thinking and many of the attitudes, including, most importantly, man's relationship with nature. The biblical account of creation was readily taken by theologians as a fundamental of belief and interpreted with literality. Man should have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air and over every living thing, and thus firmly established was the world which had been created for the benefit of man over all other life, and that it should be subservient to him. His jurisdiction over other living things should be total. A clear line was drawn between man and all other creatures. Man had rights, had a soul. He could intellectualize, reason, own land, feel pain, and comprehend the nature of God and his creation. The other inhabitants of the natural world possessed none of these and merely existed, subsisted, and procreated. Animals were here to be employed as beasts of toil for food, sport, vivisection, or what other requirement might be designed. Certainly the line between man and beasts gave clear justification for the elimination as vermin of any creatures that were thought to compete in any way with his interests. Few creatures were saved, few wild creatures, save those taken for food. You'll maybe remember with the rhyme, where it says 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie, were seen as beneficial and could therefore understandably be hunted, persecuted, and eliminated. Furthermore, and importantly, there was very little consideration that one could even be cruel to animals. After all, they were deemed incapable of feelings. Even domestic stock were sometimes appallingly treated. Sometimes domestic fowl were nailed to the floor by their feet in order to fatten them, kept in the dark, blinded, or had their legs cut off in a hideous belief that it increased the tenderness of the meat. Against this sort of background, the wholesale slaughter of undesired wildlife by any means or all means was of little consequence and must have hardly impinged upon the conscience of rural inhabitants, inured by the strife of continual hardship and the fight for subsistence. It would not have only been seen as a need, but also certainly in the early eyes as the perfect right, supported by the teachings of Scripture. That's pretty bad news, hey? So the church wasn't necessarily always the big fan of creation, and it led to our dominion and ways that we could rule over it and be destructive. However, good news is, what a relief. I want to put forward a different perspective to that verse. And which I think takes on a bit of a broader biblical foundation. Instead of a hierarchy with God at the top and snails at the bottom, if we look at Genesis 1 and 2 in a bit broader sense, it suggests a more two-dimensional approach. Next slide. A more two-dimensional approach where there is a connection between us and nature, and between nature and God, and us and God. If we remember, nature was created by God, or creation was created by God, as we are created by God. So we can read it again, actually, in Genesis. If you read it in Genesis 1:24 to 31, we can see that on the sixth day, God says, let the land produce living creatures, all according to their kind. Livestock, wild animals, according to their kind, wild animals, etc., etc. And then it says, let God make let us make man in our own image. So the same day that God is making livestock, he's made us. So we're like cows. We're made the same day as cows, or wolves or bears. We were all made on the same day. Anyway, just go back to that slide again, the previous one. All right, so if we look at it in that biblical context, I think we can see a role with creation that has three particular elements to it that we can adopt. Okay, the first one is that we are members. We were, as I say, we were made on the same day as cows and wolves. Therefore, we are part of creation. We have a common maker. We share a common maker with creation, and that should affect our relationship with creation. This commonality is reflected elsewhere in the Bible. If you look in Psalm 103, it says, "For he knows how we were formed. He remembers that we are dust. The life of mortals is like grass. They flourished like a flower. The wind blows over it, and it is gone no more." So our lives are very much like creation. We come, we go. We are very similar in many ways. However, God has placed us above creation. But he says our second role is the role of a ruler. We are to rule, but we are to rule in the image of God, says Genesis 1:26. Let us make mankind in our own image. So if we want to know how to rule, we just need to look at how God would rule. And we can get an example of that if we look in the New Testament. In Matthew 20, you might remember the story. The mother of Zebedee's sons, comes to Jesus with her sons, and she says to Jesus, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine might sit at your right and the other at your left." But then Jesus says to them, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must become your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So God's rule is not one of tyranny and exploitation, but of service and sacrifice. So for us as Christians, that should be our attitude to how we are to act out this rule over creation. Do it in the image of God. Each one of us has the image of God in us. How does that manifest itself in this dominion over nature? Then the third role, we've looked at being a member, we've looked at being a ruler. The third role is being a keeper. So if we want to know what it means to be a keeper, we can look at Genesis 2, verse 15, and this is as another account of the creation. And it says, Genesis 2, it says, "The Lord God took man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it." So this is where God gives explicit instructions to Adam and Eve as to what he's to do in the Garden of Eden. And he uses this phrase, to work it and take care of it. And the work described here is the two Hebrew words, abad and shamar. So Adam is told to abar and shamar the garden. Now, I know you're very keen to know what abar and shamar are, aren't you? Like, what on earth are those two words? Well, the word abad has a broad meaning, and it's sort of around serving. It's the kind of things that the Levites used to do in the temple. The word shama has the idea of blessing, and it's the kind of word that is used in Numbers. Remember that phrase where it says, "The Lord make his face to shine upon you, the Lord bless you and keep you." The bless you and keep you there is this word shama. So there is this idea in Genesis 2 that we are to be people who are protecting and sustaining this creation. So we're part of creation. We are to rule over creation, but there's a pastoral element to our rule over nature, and that is the kind of rule which God expects, and that's the kind of rule which God shows himself. So if you look at those two versions, I would say against that background of that broader biblical understanding, it's hard to defend the dominion rule of creation that we've seen in history. Our job, our human vocation, is to work in and take care of God's garden like stewards of a treasured possession. And then if we're thinking, is there any other biblical sort of models as to how this stewardship work? There's a helpful model within one of Jesus' parables called the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And in that story, if you remember, there's a master and his servants. The master is going away on a journey, and the master entrusts his servants with different amount of talents. And they are supposed to look after them whilst he is away. He then goes on a journey, he returns, and then he evaluates the stewardship of the entrusted talents, and he rewards those, how they've used what he's given to them, and he condemns the one who's kind of not really bothered. So we can use that as a model to say, well, how can we learn from that as to how we might rule over creation? And if we want to rule creation in a way that pleases God, we can maybe learn those lessons. We can learn a few lessons. The one is, in the same way that those servants were not the owners of the talents that they were given, we are not the owners of creation. We have just been given this for a short period of time. In the same way that the servants were entrusted until the rightful owner returns, we too rule over creation until the rightful owner returns. As Graham has previously said, Jesus will come back. He will come back and he will claim the creation that he has made and that he has entrusted to us. So if we put those two together, we don't own it and we are looking after it until our Lord comes back, then our response should be not to take advantage of it or exploit what has been given to us to care for. So if we go back to that analogy of the car, so remember I said the car, God's made this nice shiny car and he's given it to us, then our first response shouldn't be to drive it into a ditch. Our response should be, wow, look at this car, I'm going to go really, really slowly. And but God doesn't say leave it in the drive and don't do anything with it. He wants us to drive the car, but he doesn't want us to crash the car. And if we thought, my dad's given me this car and it's awesome, maybe we would drive it carefully and we wouldn't just go, I'm just going to drive it anywhere I want. So, God has given us creation for us to work in and care for. Creation is not ours to do what we want, and God wants it back. God is the ultimate temporary ambassadors. We should love nature because we love God. And if we do not care for it, we do not love God. So there you go. That's the first part. The idea that we're in charge and how we should rule in the light that we're just looking after something from God. So, easy peasy, hey? God's given us creation. All we've got to do is look after it. Right. So next slide, please. Okay, so how are we doing on our rule of God? Okay? God's given it to us. Pretty easy. We just got to look after it. Be nice. If Jesus came back today, what would he write on our creation Ofsted report? Okay, like when the master comes back to the servants of the parable of the talents, would he say to us, well done, good and faithful servants? Okay, actually, can you go to the next slide? Right, so when I was batching about to think about, how can I sort of summarize where the world is, I came across this paper that actually, this is a scientific paper that actually starts off by quoting Genesis 1. I was like, wow, this is like a gift. Anyway, so this in this paper, it starts off by saying, in Genesis, God blesses human beings and bids us to take dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every other living thing. We are entreated to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. Bearing in mind this is a scientific paper. The bad news is, and the good news is, that we have almost succeeded. Okay? So he's setting the scene there in a biblical context and saying how well, he's almost writing the report card for us. Then it goes on to say, there is little debate in scientific circles about the importance of human influence on ecosystems. According to scientists' reports, we appropriate over 40% of the net primary productivity produced on the Earth each year. We consume 35% of the productivity of the oceanic shelf, and we use 60% of freshwater runoff. The unprecedented escalation in both human population and consumption in the 21st century has resulted in environmental crises never before encountered in the history of the world. E.O. Wilson claims it would now take 4 Earths to meet the consumption demands of the current human population if every human being consumed on the level of the average US inhabitant. The influence of human beings on the planet has become so pervasive that it is hard to find adults in any country who have not seen the environment around them reduced in natural values during their lifetime. The cumulative effect of these many local changes in the global phenomenon of human influence on nature has resulted in a new geological epoch some call the Anthropocene. Human influence is arguably the most important factor affecting life of all kinds in the world today. Hurrah! We've done it. We've subdued the earth. We are the most important thing ever. Nothing is like us. Not really. No. Fantastic. Is it good? Are we good and faithful servants? I'm not so sure. All right. So in order to unpack whether we are good and faithful servants, I just want to take another step back into Genesis, and let's have a look what God thought of the world when he gave it to us. Okay? So remember, we're there. God's given us the car. Remember the car analogy? He's given us the car. He's like, man, I want to give you this beautiful car. What happens before you get given a car in a higher place? Somebody goes around, don't they? And they check the tyres and they say, there's a scratch here and there's a window, and they just make sure they tell you what it's like before they give it to you, so that when you give it back, they can check it out. Okay, so if God was doing that with creation the night before he gave it to you, what would he be saying? All right, now we can go back to that previous slide. Right, this was his review of the creation, which he gave to us before we had it. And this is from Genesis 1:31. God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning of the 6th day. So God said, guys, see this here? This is like super good. Oh, it's all painted, the MOT's done, the tyres are all pumped up, the paint's all shiny. God is saying, this is good. Okay, but what does good mean? Okay, so we're all thinking, okay, so God thinks it's good, because if we understand what good means, then we can check out today's world and we can be like, yeah, this is just as good as when God gave it to us. Okay, so when God says this is good, what he really means is he was affirming his original design and intent. He was going to display his good character, his purpose, his nature. All that is amazing about God was manifest in creation. It was exactly the way he wanted it to be. It was exactly the quality he desired. It was the perfect hand-built car by God. It reflected his character, his power, and his nature, because it could not do that. Okay, now unfortunately, the problem of humans today is wrapped up in how we now interpret what good looks like. All right, so this is the jeopardy part of the sermon, okay? Because now you have got to give me the correct answer to this next section. Otherwise, my entire sermon falls apart. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some pictures of the world today, right? And I want you to tell me whether you think it's good or not, because this is our test. You know, how do we interpret good and bad? How bad are we at good? So I'm just going to put the 2 slides on. Right, this one. Just put your hands up if you think this is good. God came back. Would he say it's good? Okay. Who would say that's bad? Uh-oh. Wow, this is great. Early on, everybody was supposed to say this was good, so that's fantastic. So there were some dissenters in there, okay? Next one. Good. Bad. Oh, that was pretty easy. Oh, no, Yari quite likes that one. All right, next one. Good. Good. Oh. I like it. It's not as easy as you think, is it? Bad. Oh, look, I love this. It's great. Okay, this is much easier than I thought. Whew. There was a bit of good. Oh, bad. You're getting the hang of this. This is good. I like this. All right, next one. Good. Yeah. We've got to we have to drive somewhere, don't we? That's bad. All right, okay, this is getting easier. Right, next one. Good. And bad. Some of you are not really, you're sitting on the fence, aren't you? All right, move on. Move on, next one. Good. Is that good? Would God come back and say that's good? Brilliant. We need to live somewhere, don't we, cities? But remember, this is our creation, so we might be not quite sure, but we need to make a decision about whether this is good or bad. Is God going to come back and say this is good or bad? Bad? That's a nice bridge, though, isn't it? And look, there's the shard. Somebody spent a lot of time designing that, and God gave them the creativity to do that. Last one, I think. This is for you, Ian. Good or bad? Good? Yeah, we need energy from somewhere, don't we? Bad? Yeah, terrible, isn't it, Ian? Terrible. All right. Anyway, so what I wanted to illustrate by that is actually we as a collective cannot agree on what is good or bad in creation. Okay? So therefore, where God has said explicitly something is good, and so we here can't agree. So that's not very helpful, is it? Unfortunately, it just gets worse. So, I think there are 4 ways how we have lost sight of what good means when God called creation good. I'm just going to go through those 4 reasons. Okay, the first reason why we don't know what good is anymore is because we've redefined what good is. We as Christians have taken on our role and we've gone, oh, you know what, God, all that good stuff, actually, maybe this is a little bit good. So, when God said certain things were good, we've then said, actually, you know what? So let's have the next slide. Here we go. Here's a nice wolf, all right? So when God made the world, he made wolves, and he went, oh, yeah, wolves, I love them. Then we came along, and we went, oh, wolves, I'm not sure I really like them. I'm just going to kill them all. Is that okay, God? So in this country, we just killed them all, and now we haven't got any wolves, all right? Next one. Pheasants. What's wrong with pheasants? Surely you're not going to get pheasants, are you? All right, so when God made the world, he made a certain number of pheasants. And what we've said is, oh, what about if we have millions and millions and millions and millions of more pheasants than you started off with? So I was just checking up the figures before I came up here, but it's unbelievable. And I couldn't believe this, but there's somewhere in the order of like 35 million pheasants reintroduced into this country, put into this country to shoot every year, which is kind of a bit more than God made out, isn't it? Okay, next one. Fish. So rather than God said, hey guys, I've given you all this fish in the sea. Just look after them, will you? We've gone, oh, fish, let's catch them all at once. Right. So we've had a different idea about what good is. So this next slide coming up. So this on the left here, this is a picture of the food web. Okay? So you might be familiar with this from biology, where there's little things at the bottom that get eaten by bigger things as it goes up. And God went, here you go, guys. This is the house of nature. This is how it works. I think it's a pretty good model. Now, what we've said is, you know what? We're going to get rid of some of these, and we're going to mess with this. So if you look up there, if you look, the wolf, if you like, is the equivalent to the fox here. So we've taken out the bricks from the house of nature. We've taken out some predators. We don't want that. But then in the other places we've put some more bricks in. So we've rammed in these, in the pheasants analogy, we've rammed some pheasants in at the bottom. And then in the fish analogy, we've just kind of gone, why don't we take out a whole floor in the house of nature? I'm sure it'll be fine. And then what happens is we've got this thing on the right here where the Jengas are all falling down. So because of the way that we think is good, we've just kind of ruined the whole house of nature. Okay, second reason where we've gone away from the idea of good of God is we are not very good at intrinsic value. Okay? So when Genesis says that God looked at what he made and he said it was good, we're being told unequivocally that what God has created is of value. God's gone, I love this. it has a goodness of itself. And we might call that intrinsic value. Virtue being created by God and assessed by him as being good. So if you've ever been outside and you've kind of had a really sort of warm, fuzzy feeling, being outside in nature, I think that's you feeling the intrinsic value of nature. And it's an echo of how God felt on that evening before he handed over that creation to you. However, in our Western culture, we're not very good at intrinsic value. Worth for us is how much somebody is willing to pay for it. And this has led to creation being seen through the lens of resources and there to be exploited for commercial gain. So we don't talk about creation, we talk about natural resources as if they're something to be used by us. But this is not God's economy. Okay, and I want to give you now a great example of intrinsic value. Next slide, please. Here we go. This is the blobfish. Have you all heard of the blobfish? This is the story of how intrinsic value can work. So in 2013 actually, the blobfish was voted the ugliest fish in the world. Poor little fish. It sits on the bottom of the ocean and just like, I don't know what it does, but it was voted the ugliest fish in the world. 12 years later, it's now been voted the fish of the year. Now this fish has got no real economic value, but people have actually ascribed it an intrinsic value just because it's like a fun thing. So we can find intrinsic value if we want to, and the blobfish is an example of that. Okay, next one. What's another reason why we have lost the idea of what good means to God? We have short memories. Okay, next slide. We have short memories. All right, I'm going to show you 3 slides of the same fishing company who send people out to fish and the catches they've caught. So this is from the 2000s. Look at all them fish. If you were a fisherman and you brought them fish back in the 2000s, you're feeling pretty good with yourself, aren't you? Look at those fish that I've got. Until your dad comes along, next slide, who went to the same place in the 1980s, and he shows you the fish that he caught. And his dad's like, you're fishing nothing like the fish that I caught. I caught fish like this. And then the son is feeling really sad, and the dad's feeling really good, until granddad comes along, next slide, and shows you the fish that he caught in the 1950s. And he's going, you boys, you don't know anything about fish. So the same place, over 50 years, the fish have gone from the size of the first picture to the size of the last picture. And this is an example of what we call shifting baselines. So in the shifting baseline syndrome, it's a phenomenon where each generation perceives its own time as the normal state of the environment, even when it's significantly degraded from previous periods. And this occurs because we haven't got the memory, knowledge of experience or how it used to look historically. So we just think that as it is today is how it's always been. So when I see a magpie in my garden, I go, wow, look at this wildlife-rich garden, not knowing that my grandma used to have like magpies and wolves and dragons and lions roaming about the whole garden. So imagine what God's baseline was like when he was there. Imagine us going to God with that first picture and going, God, look at all the fish in your sea. It's amazing. And God going, there's probably a few more there when I gave it to you. Anyway, so this, and in case you think, oh, America's too far away from here, next slide. Right. Anybody tell me, Rowan, you might do this. It's a GeoGuessr. Where was this picture taken? Where in the world? Scarborough, very good. Scarborough in 1930 when they used to do tuna fishing competitions. So these are tuna caught in Scarborough tuna caught in Scarborough less than 100 years ago. But within 20 years, that tuna fishing competition was stopped because there weren't any more tuna. All right. Fourth one is... Fourth reason why we can't see what good is anymore is because we haven't got any vision to see what good might look like. So I'm going to show you a video now, produced by some people in Scotland, that takes a glen in Scotland today that we're familiar with, and it fast forwards it to what it might look like. And I want to use this as an example of trying to get our heads round maybe what God saw when he made creation. So we'll see if this works. So that's an impression there that within 50 years we could go from it being a barren landscape, which we might think is beautiful because that's all that we're used to, into something that's maybe more akin to what God would say is good. So, next slide. Okay. So that's just 4 reasons why I think we've lost the idea of what God's meaning of good is. So let's go back to you remember that paper was talking about the global human footprint index. This is a map which shows us the global human footprint index. The red bits are kind of where we're having an impact, and the green bits are where we're not having an impact, okay? So is this good? Look at us. We're supposed to subdue the earth and rule it and stuff, and we're not doing a bad job. We're kind of red. There's only like a few bits of green in the Arctic and stuff where we haven't there. So we've just about done it, haven't we? We're so good that scientists have even named an epoch after us. So after all these years after the Tower of Babel, we've made a name for ourselves. Others may think it's terrible. Does our dominion of creation represented on this map has come at great cost to creation that God said was very good? So I want to remind you that what good meant to God, it was to reflect and display his good character, power, and nature. Now, I think God's good character, power, and nature is displayed in diversity and abundance. How can we marvel at what God has made if we cannot see it and we cannot share it? And we have lost so much of God's creation through our mismanagement that we are inevitably blinkered about how we think good compares to what God thinks good is and what good might look like. So we've lost so much. I mean, whenever a species goes extinct, I can imagine that God is not pleased. Okay, next slide. See what it is. Next one, not that one. no, not that. So this is what we call the Living Planet Index. That's just some clever people counting all the animals in the world and see if there's more or less than there were previously. For all the places in the world, you can see it's all going down. So this is all like the loss of the animals that God has made, the species that God has made, the leaking out of creation to the side that's happened over in the last 50 years. And this must make God sad. It must be counter to what he thinks is good, and it must be a judgment on our rule of creation. I would argue that the Human Footprint Index is not a measure of our success in ruling creation, but our failure. In our assessment of this, we need to humble ourselves before God and get better at seeing the world as he sees it. Like it says in Romans, be transformed by the renewing of our minds so we can discern what God's will is and accept what his good and perfect will is, rather than rest in the comfort of our own perceptions of the world. Okay, so this is how the American evangelical theologian, philosopher, and Presbyterian pastor Francis Schaeffer sums up where we are today. Now let's look at it in another way. Man was given dominion over creation. This is true. But since the fall, man has exercised this dominion wrongly. He is a rebel who has set himself at the center of the universe. By creation, man has dominion, but as a fallen creature, he has used that dominion wrongly. Because he is fallen, he exploits created things as though they were nothing in themselves and as though he has an autonomous right to them. Surely then Christians who have returned through the work of the Lord Jesus Christ to fellowship with God and have proper place of reference to the God who is there should demonstrate a proper use of nature. We are to have dominion over it, but we are not to use it as fallen man uses it. We are not to go about acting as though it were nothing in itself, or as though we will do to nature everything we want to. Okay, so now that you're all depressed about what bad job we're doing, the good news is I'll just finish off by giving you some top tips as to how to get better. All right, so remember, you are made in the image of God, so you've got all the power you need already to see the goodness of creation and to work to rule in his image with the influence that you have where you are. Okay, we may not all be able to prevent the destruction of the rainforest or prevent climate change, but you can apply things with your interaction with creation where you are. And I've done them in a very handy acrostic. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that you should rule like King Charles by this, but it was just a nice leader. All right, so curiosity. Next slide. So let's be curious about the world that God has made. God has made like a wildly amazing world with loads of things in it that you think, that's just weird, or that's amazing. Well, how did that happen? And to not be interested or curious about God's world is a little bit neglectful. You know, imagine somebody, like, if God gives you that car and you just like park it in the drive and you're like, oh, well, whatever, it's just a car. It's kind of a bit disrespectful for what the opportunity that is given to you. So, for example, did you know that elephants can't jump? I'll try and find one that somebody didn't know, all right? All right. Can kangaroos walk backwards? No. Did you know that sea otters hold their hands while sleeping so they don't float away from each other? Oh, you're all just such knowledgeable wildlife. Try and find one. Did you know that giraffes hum? Have you all been looking on the same website of curious animal facts as I have? Anyway, so nature is full of amazing things, and God is there saying, find these things out. I've done these things to bless you, and so that you can see what a great God I am, and you can worship me better because of this amazing nature. So be curious, whether that's going to Africa to go on the safari, or just going in your own garden and going, what's that bee? Is that bee a red-bottomed bee? What does a red-bottomed bee look like? Why do bees make honey? What's the difference between a bee and a wasp? There's loads of ways that you can glorify God by taking an interest in the creation that he has made. Right, where are we up to now? Next one. A, acknowledge. Okay. So we need to acknowledge that we are part of nature as well as rulers of nature. So our rule is not our own thoughts on our own dominion, but it's acknowledging that actually when we rule nature, it affects us because we are connected to nature. Remember that. Remember that we are not the only ones who worship nature. I was listening to the song this morning, and in that first song, who noticed the creation worshipping reference in that first song? The mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of his name. We're not the only ones who worship God. Nature also worships God. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal his knowledge. So nature is worshipping God. Nature and us are worshipping the same God. Therefore, how can we do anything which is going to unnecessarily and irresponsibly harm that nature? So we need to acknowledge that we are rulers of nature, but we are part of nature. All right, next one. Respect. Okay, so out of that rule should come respect. I'm going to give you two examples, one good and one bad, of how to respect nature. On the left here, you've got a stalker returning having shot a deer. And I want to read you a blog from, not this particular guy, but from a guy who does shoot deer. He writes this: by the time I arrived, a herd of around 15 fallow deer were feeding in the shadows about 200 yards away, right on the edge of the property. I also manage a neighbouring farmland, so if they moved across the boundary, it wasn't a concern. Positioning myself behind a hedge, I watched as two does stepped out into the open. Even in the low light, I could tell they were last year's young. The way they moved and behaved gave them away. There was a youthful naivety to their actions. One was particularly carefree, glancing up occasionally, but otherwise feeding without concern. A little jump and a shake suggested she caught a scent of something, but she quickly settled again. As the light grew, the herd began shifting towards cover. I took the shot at 117 yards, and the doe dropped around 20 yards from where she had stood. The population on this ground is large, and control is necessary to maintain balance. Any ground I manage is approached with professionalism, respect, and care. Each deer is an individual, and management decisions are never taken lightly. It is not just about shooting the first animal that appears, it is about making informed decisions. Deer populations can increase by around a third each year, so it doesn't take long before numbers become unmanageable. Across the country, populations are rising, and management is essential to maintain a healthy balance between deer, agriculture, and conservation. Whether it's a deer, foxes, or rabbits, my approach remains the same: professionalism, respect, and responsibility. It's the only way forward. So there's an example of respect for creation. It's not that we can't kill these things. It's gone. Not that we can't kill these things, but it's the way that we do it. Did you see the detail he knew, the relationship he had with the animals, the fact that he was looking at all of these things and he was taking all these things carefully? Now, the second story is slightly different. Anybody know what that bird is there? Points for somebody who can give me her name. Yeah. Yeah, the last passenger pigeon, whose name was Martha. I don't know who christened it Martha. Anyway, so passenger pigeons, okay? This is the story of the decline of the passenger pigeon. The hunters kept records. And between 1866 and 1876, when the passenger pigeon species was already in decline, they harvested 10 million pigeons a year. Even when flocks started getting smaller and smaller, some regulations came into effect to protect them. People disregarded the rules and kept killing them, tracking them down, and even in their nesting areas. The last large flock was noticed in Petsaki, Michigan in 1878, and 50,000 birds a day were killed every day for 5 months. After that, only smaller flocks were seen, and professional hunters tracked them down and killed them before they could reproduce. Conservationists captured some and kept them in captivity and tried to breed them, but they were a type of animal that needs extremely large flocks to reproduce, and the birds would not reproduce in captivity, so before long, the birds in the wild were all gone. The last recorded sighting in Canada was of a lone passenger pigeon in Pettitangwishi in May 1902. The last passenger pigeon was Martha, Cincinnati Zoo. She died 1st of September 1914. So there's a slight difference in the care and respect for creation between the passenger pigeon and the deer. Right, last bit, you'll be glad to know. Right, last one. E is for eternity. If we're looking about creation and creation care, we need an eternal perspective. Graham's already read to us that passage from Romans. This idea that creation was a subject of the fall, but creation, just like we, are waiting for Jesus to return. Now, I'll read that just a little bit of what Graham read. So in Romans 8 it says, "For creation waits in eager anticipation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subject to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from bondage to decay and brought into freedom and the glory of the children of God." So someday, creation will be put back to the state it was when God found it was good. Now, I've talked to some people, some Christians, who've said, it doesn't matter. We don't have to bother looking after creation because God's going to come back and it's all going to be fine. So we can just do exactly what we like. And I just raised my eyebrows. I was like, really? Is that what you think? Now, I hope this morning that I've shown to you that is not the correct response to have to that passage, that even though it will be restored and Jesus is going to return, that we have a responsibility now. So that approach of saying, well, it's fine, God's going to come back, is the same as the son who takes the car, drives it into a ditch, and then says, it's all right, that's got breakdown, he'll get it out. It shows a total disrespect for what has been created and what has been given to you. But our hope is that when Jesus' return, we do not need to despair about the plight of the world. So yes, we do what we can with creation, and that God has given us to rule, but we do not need to despair. The good news is that if by certain chance, because we were chatting away, we did drive the car into a ditch, our dad will come back. The rightful owner will return. And he who is seated on the throne will say, I am making everything new. What a relief. So it doesn't matter that we don't know what good looks like. We can argue about that. But the good news is that God is making everything new. So that is our hope. So do you remember when I started this? I talked about David Attenborough and the fact that the world had broken into what is our domain and had taken over the role that we should have. Well, I want to finish off by doing a little bit of a comparison between that. So the people of this world, how they care for it, and their approach to care, and ours. Okay, because in some ways it's the same. They have the same concern. They have a concern for creation. We have a concern for creation. But the difference is that theirs, the world, their concern for creation comes from a message of fear. But ours, we have a message of hope for creation. The world cares because it loves creation and it is afraid to lose it. But we care because we love the Creator. And our hope is in Jesus returning to reclaim it. That difference, the fact that our hope is in Jesus and we love the Creator compared to the world, who just love the creation and they're just determined, they worship the Creator and not the creation and not the Creator. That contrast should be the defining difference which sets Christians apart from the world in the way that we look at how we rule and manage nature. We have a hope, and it seems to me that the world doesn't have that hope. There's somebody who I know who believes in his lifetime there is going to be an apocalypse. There's going to be a global apocalypse. And his primary, well, not his primary, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to save the world to prevent the apocalypse. And that does nothing apart from every time something on the news happens that some creature is gone or something is flooded or some wildfire or whatever, he has a panic attack and he's like, oh my word. You might have heard of eco-anxiety in the world that there is today. Everybody's got eco-anxiety because they feel like they are the only ones who can save the world. Nature is in trouble. But we don't need to feel like that because we know that we ultimately are not going to, the world is okay, the world is safe, Jesus is coming back, we have that hope. We do what we can now, but we don't need to have this eco-anxiety. We need to trust that God is in control and in his own time, he will come back and he will make everything right. But in the meantime, we have got to do what we can to rule in the way that he would, given our limitations. All right? So I'll just leave you with this last quote. These last two quotes. You minute to read them, I'll read them out to you. So this is this reflection of how the world does it and how we should do it. So the bottom one on the left here, this is Greta Thunberg. You might have heard of her. She's quite an advocate for climate change and all that kind of thing. This is her approach to this, what we call crisis. She says, I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear. I feel it every day. And now it's gone. I want you to feel it every day. I want you to act as if your house was on fire, because it is. Now, if your messenger and your Messiah was saying that to you, how are you going to feel? You're going to be like, house is on fire. All right? Now, this is what our Messiah says to us as Christians about the world and the place we're in. What he says is, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among us and among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and he will be their God. Now, which of those quotes makes you feel more peaceful? Certainly for me, in the time of crisis that we're in now, it is that one from Revelation. I don't want to listen to Greta Thunberg anymore.